So hi everyone, welcome to this latest in Meridian West's 30-minute webinar series. Today looking at a really fascinating topic, growing pains for fast growth professional firms. I think really interesting topic because certainly from a lot of the work that we've done with a range of firms over the last couple of years, we've seen, we've seen firms, experience some significant growth over the last couple of years, but that's not without its challenges. So what we wanted to do today was to shed some light on some of those experiences that we've seen, some of the growing pains that firms are telling us they're experiencing, and some advice and strategies around how to address those. I'm delighted to say that to help me in doing that, I'm joined by colleagues Ben Kent, founder director of Meridian West, and also by Ellie Berry, who's a senior consultant here in the team. Before I hear from both of them, and just to set the scene for everybody, I had a look this morning just at a few stats just to help us put some meat on the bones of what we mean by fast growth and what the growth story for professional services has been over the last couple of years. And unsurprisingly, if we look at the performance of the professional services sector since the start of COVID, really, the professional services sector, certainly in the UK, has outgrown the rest of the UK economy. It's been one of the most resilient sectors, even in times of broader economic downturn, and has performed much more impressively collectively than the rest of the economy. Some more specifics. I had a look at the kind of US law firm growth, taking a slightly longer viewpoint on that over the last 5 years, and what we've seen there is over 40% growth over the last 5 years amongst the leading US law firms. Similar picture emerges if we look at the UK. Many of you may have seen PwC's latest UK law firm survey that was published a couple of weeks ago, and they report that average fee income growth over the last 12 months has been just over 8% in the UK amongst the top 100 firms. In the UK accountancy sector, we're seeing growth even more significant amongst the top 20 accountancy firms in the UK. 7 of those have reported growth of over 20% in the last 12 months. And the consulting sector equally is impressive. According to the MCA, 2022 saw 25% growth in the UK consulting sector. So obviously these are industry averages, but I think what's interesting from this is that we're seeing growth both at the top end of the market, the very large firms, but even faster growth, particularly in the kind of mid-tier emerging sector of the market as well. And we'll talk about that in a minute. So that's just to put some numbers to our growth story there. But I wonder, maybe coming to you first, Ben, do those numbers kind of chime with what you're hearing in the market, and what is fueling this fast growth that we're seeing, particularly over the last couple of years for professional services?
Yeah, I think it does. I think the coming out of COVID, I think the professional services firms have done extremely well. As you say, they've been reporting very good financial numbers. We do surveys amongst buyers of professional firms, and they're still looking positive in terms of next year. Not quite at the same level as we saw last year, but still good growth. In terms of your second point about what's driving that, I think probably the biggest one is so many businesses now looking at digital transformation, and the kind of associated kind of concerns around that, about, well, generative AI, but cyber risk. And you've seen that the Big Four in particular have built out really quite quickly services to help with digital transformation. I think just the more complicated social political environment means that businesses are facing a whole range of risks. And I think what's interesting, it's not just legal risks or financial risks, it's kind of interrelated. So I think the nature the risk environment has really changed.
Yeah, and I think it's and I think it does speak to certainly demand, as you're talking about. You know, obviously we've had a period of significant change. Some of the factors you've talked about there, you know, the pandemic, technology, you know, we know these create significant demand drivers, but also I think many firms have spotted the opportunity to really lean into those in terms of, you know, developing those new service offerings, developing those new propositions, you know, really capitalizing on that demand. Ellie, just interested in your reflections as well on the kind of wider market. Does this, you know, does anything from that growth story kind of surprise you, or does that reflect what you're seeing too?
No, I think, yeah, it definitely reflects. I think agreeing with Ben, I think during, you know, the pandemic and COVID, we saw a lot of people focusing on efficiency. And now really looking at sort of now these growth opportunities. I think a lot of the support that we do with clients at the moment is, you know, exploring those new areas that you said, technology, AI, but also different sort of sector opportunities, especially if we look at more sort of inorganic growth and M&A. A lot of support's coming from there as well.
Yeah, and it's really interesting you mentioned M&A, I think, because, you know, that would be also another trend that I'd definitely highlight that's contributed to a lot of this. I think, you know, not only are we seeing many firms actually, you know, merging, buying up competitors, buying up niche players to kind of broaden their service offering, but I think we're also seeing, certainly from a kind of private equity perspective, you know, greater appetite to invest in service businesses, B2B businesses, seeing significant potential returns there, not least because of what you talked about, Ben, in terms of the technology enabled business model. You know, that's, you know, seen as a kind of quite reliable source of income there. And again, Ben, just kind of interested in your reflections on that kind of M&A trend, the kind of inorganic piece of this growth story.
Well, I think lots of professional firms has been quite a lot of acquisition, particularly in the sort of hot areas around technology, and we're doing quite a lot of work in the ESG space as well, because, you know, you've seen the Big Four of acquiring actually quite substantial consultancy firms there, and there's a bit of a land grab going on. I think, you know, the wider M&A market, I think that is the one aspect of demand that has slowed right down, you know, in terms of servicing on deals. So but that's from the client's perspective.
And it's interesting because it also reflects something that I've really picked up in the last couple of years, and we've done some research on this as well, is that, you know, from the buyer side, there's definitely an appetite to consider and to use more of those niche players. So, you know, people, you know, those kind of fast growth businesses offering services around data, cybersecurity, ESG, ED&I, which we know kind of more established players are also offering many of the same services now, some by acquiring those niche players, but the appetite from the demand side is definitely there. So, you know, I think we've hopefully kind of confirmed that thesis that, you know, the sector generally has been fast growth, but I think there are certainly areas of you know, really fast growth within that, and a number of reasons for it. But kind of with that excitement of growth, I think also comes some growing pains. And again, just to kind of bring this up on screen for everybody, you know, we were kind of thinking about, well, what are the biggest challenges that we've seen, you know, working with our clients who are, you know, experiencing this significant growth story. And I think they really fall into 4 buckets, essentially, the ones you can see here. So I think the first is really around that kind of strategic leadership, you know, kind of just not having the headspace to really kind of set a clear strategy. You know, it's almost that kind of snowball effect. You know, the growth of the business is outpacing the rate at which, you know, the kind of leaders can really manage that growth effectively. So I think that's one. I think the second area is certainly around people and culture. So people being, you know, very busy, overworked, just not having the capacity to kind of meet what clients need. I think the third area is definitely client experience. And again, we'll talk in detail on each of these in a minute, but, you know, that's certainly a big one in terms of, you know, what's the impact for clients for this growth story. And then the fourth is really around the kind of internal plumbing, you know, the structure, the operations, how does that, you know, really keep pace with the fast growth. And I think, you know, many senses, these don't sit in isolation. You know, they're a kind of interlinked series of challenges. So, you know, let's maybe break down some of these in terms of what we've seen, both in terms of the the evidence for the growing pains, but also what we've seen firms do to kind of mitigate and address some of these head on. So maybe we start, Ben, with that whole piece around kind of just leadership. And strategy. I mean, my sense, speaking to some managing partners and other leaders in firms, is that they almost feel like the growth of the business is kind of outpacing the rate at which they can get their arms around it. So, I mean, is that what's your sense on how kind of firm leaders address this growth challenge?
Yeah, I think it's quite sort of ambivalent, really. I think they often project out to the outward market that we're a global firm, we offer a one-stop shop, but I think also not kind of wanting to kind of pull away from the things that have made them successful so far. So this idea that we're very collegiate, people have autonomy, different teams can work as they want. And that's been really successful. And I think that the smart ones are the ones who kind of recognise that to carry on being successful, you do need a sort of change of style. And it's been clear, which elements of the culture you keep and which you essentially have to dispense with.
Yeah, and I can see you nodding vigorously, Ellie. What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think around the culture point, I think often the biggest challenge is, like preserving that good culture. And I think that's what people sort of hold on to the most. I think also from a client perspective, things we hear internally is often like we had that close-knit culture, which clients also say, like, we got that sort of close-knit service. But I think it's being sort of conscious and aware that sometimes that culture needs to mature and evolve, and that's not necessarily a bad thing at all. I think it's just ensuring that you're bringing everyone along with that journey and being really communicative and transparent, and open to feedback, I think, at every stage.
And it's interesting what you were saying, Ben, there about the kind of ambition. Many of these firms is to go from we're a regional player to a UK player, or a regional player to a US player, and then we're transatlantic, and then we're global. And some of that can happen very quickly, particularly if businesses are talking about acquiring or merging with partners on the other side of the world. And what's I guess some of the risks inherent in taking that quite ambitious acquisitive strategy?
Well, I think the number one is, to assume that growth is good. Obviously growth is good, certainly from the leadership perspective, but I think you just have to communicate it, what's in it for your employees and what's in it for your clients. Because oftentimes they get a bit kind of confused, oh, I know, we work with a law firm, for example. We knew you as a nice regional player. We knew everyone. Now you seem to be like this transatlantic firm. Who are you? I think it's a question we often get. So I think I think the key is to kind of have a very clear vision. We've got this 5-year plan. This is what it means for the clients and the employees, and some good news stories around that, and giving just people a bit of reassurance. I think it's critical.
Yeah. Excuse me. Just a reminder. Anyone's got any questions, comments, reflections, do put them in the chat and the Q&A. We'll try and cover those as we go through, or a little bit of time at the end for that. So picking up, you talked a bit already about, I guess, the kind of the client lens on this. And I think one of the issues, certainly in terms of that quite acquisitive growth strategy, is inconsistency. So either you've got legacy teams operating in a completely different way than the core business, or even just you're creating new services, and they don't necessarily feel to clients exactly like they're used to. What are you hearing, Ellie, in terms of from the client's perspective? What do these kind of growing pains look like from where they sit?
Yes, I think it's definitely linked to the sort of culture and people aspect. I think capacity and sort of people are just a lot more busy, and that trickles down to the client service and the client experience. I think similar to when you think about sort of M&A, when you bring on these new sort of acquisitions, both sort of clients and employees being uncertain of, as you said, like what the service looks like, what the brand is. And I think, again, this trickles down to the client. It's just, you know, the uncertainty around that. And I think that's when you see sort of client basics also start to sort of, you know, to have a negative effect. So responsiveness, communication, especially as you go sort of bringing on team members, we get a lot of, you know, feedback from clients about swapping teams, not knowing who's the main point of contact. So I think, yeah, those are the usual sort of pain points we start to see.
Are you picking up the same, Ben?
Yeah, exactly. Ever since COVID, you know, lack of consistency has been the big message. You know, and I think it's a quite a sort of nuanced picture. I think what I sort of sense is the firms that grew, you know, 10, 20 years ago, the big four, the magic circle, actually have nailed it. You know, we don't get much complaint about their consistency. It's the next tier, the fast growing firms. And I think there's a number of factors here. I think, you know, I think there's three factors. One is people are very busy, and so they're just dropping the ball. I think number two is many businesses have underinvested in technology and processes. So they're allowing, you know, CRM systems don't work, practice management systems don't work. And I think the third factor is the kind of working from home, which has huge benefits. But what it means is that kind of apprenticeship model, supervising more junior staff, making sure they're sort of delivering a kind of quality that is kind of client ready. I think we really need to think about that apprenticeship model. So I think it's kind of come under a lot of pressure.
Yeah, I just have a point you mentioned about the big four. I think what we're seeing a lot is, especially with these sort of challenger organizations that we're working with who are having sudden growth in these markets, such as sort of sustainability, biodiversity, who are coming up now against the big four, who have these aspects of client service, you know, really tight. So I think it's these elements of inconsistency where they're struggling that need to sort of really be tightened up.
Yeah, and you know, and I would say I would echo what both of you said, but I think it also comes through certainly in a lot of the data, you know, that we've been collecting directly from buyers of professional services. You know, those who are interested, we did a webinar on this a few months back, which I'm sure some of you may have caught. And we can put a link down below, certainly for those watching back on YouTube to this today, you know, exactly around that, what we call the satisfaction deficit. So, you know, you were saying, Ben, you know, satisfaction levels have been decreasing. And I think that consistency and coordination piece is a big driver of that. Not the only one by any stretch of the imagination, but we do see, you know, very clear link. You know, firms, yes, on the one hand, they're wanting to, you know, be able to win more opportunities with the same client, service them through different service propositions, but with that comes the you know, the kind of the danger of not providing that kind of joined up holistic service, and that's a really difficult one to kind of address. And I wonder on that, any tips based on kind of what you've seen for people on the call today, you know, if they're feeling like that's a big issue in their firm, what should they be thinking about in terms of trying to address some of that?
Yeah, I think, well, there is, as you say, there is a decline in satisfaction levels. I think it's really kind of, I think it's almost designing the client experience is my kind of overall. You can't let it just happen organically once you've sort of scaled up. And I think, you know, there's several factors within that. I think ramping up your client listening. Obviously, it's an area we specialize in, but you know, technology now means that you can get client listening around the world much more cost effectively and much more easily and get deep insight. Well, so I think start with that, understand where the pain points are. The second thing I really believe in is how do you develop kind of consistency? And I think client journey mapping is a really good tool for this. So, you know, it's in the public domain, but we work with Grant Thornton International facing exactly these challenges. How do we deliver consistency when we're offering multiple services in multiple countries? And we developed an overall client journey map that gave a kind of single taxonomy about what client service was. And then there's training and process improvement sitting within that. And I think the third area is you need to think about account management. someone, and the big firms do this really well. You know, the A&Os, the Linklaters, they have dedicated account managers and make sure that things are pulled together, bringing together the whole of the firm.
Yeah. Go on, Ellie, were you going to come in?
No, I was going to say yes. And I think a mixture of sort of client research, but also internal reflection, I think is really important. I think, as you said, sort of key account management, adopting sort of new tools and technologies that can help with that. And also promoting sort of knowledge sharing, I think internally, I think that's really important. Having some sort of standardized structures in place when you're bringing new people on, you're defining what good service looks like and what it looks like to work for the company, I think.
Yeah, and I think that's such an important point, actually, that internal reflection, because I think it can be quite easily lost just how much, you know, with growth and churn, you know, we know that the kind of talent market has been hot over the last couple of years, you know, people moving firms, you know, just how much change comes with that. And actually, you know, we've been working with, you know, one client comes to mind who I think over the last couple of years, you know, had kind of upwards of kind of 50% churn or growth in staff. So, you know, even from a couple of years back, you know, a lot of people new to the organization, not necessarily kind of aware of, you know, client service best practices, what was expected. And I think actually speaking to, you know, to some of those people on the various delivery teams, you know, there was kind of a real disconnect, I think, between those who've been kind of lifers at the organization, if I can put it like that, who've kind of grown up with the business, versus those who've kind of come in maybe from larger organizations, maybe from, you know, niche players or elsewhere, but, you know, come in with quite a different perspective. And, you know, to that point you were talking about before, Ellie, in terms of culture, you know, marrying those together can be a, you know, can be a challenge. I wonder on the kind of internal piece as well, a couple of you know, you mentioned just kind of capacity as an issue. You know, how serious should firms kind of reflect on that, Ben? Because it's definitely something that we've picked up a lot, you know, interviewing, you know, professionals, partners, associates at various firms, just kind of how much has been expected of them.
Yeah, I think there's a big, we've done several kind of employee surveys recently, and just being too busy, and actually that tipping over into kind of real work-life balance issues and mental health issues has emerged. And I think, yes, you need to be concerned about it from a human perspective. I think also people become sort of disenchanted about the growth of the firm if, you know, they just equate growth with more work. So I think the kind of way of dealing with it is, first of all, don't try and bury the issue. I think the smarter firms are kind of doing pulse surveys, taking the temperature, either through surveys or just making sure are people okay. The other thing which I think can work really, really well is kind of looking at two together, so the client survey and the employee survey together, because often they're set in different silos, but actually looking to two, you can really give you super deep insight, because you can see the clients will see the sort of the symptoms. You know, the symptoms are slow speed of response, inconsistency, but actually the root cause of that will often be from the staff who say, well, the reason we're slow is because we have inadequate technology. So you can get to the heart of the issue. So it's a good diagnostic.
Yeah, and I think that's really important, because actually a lot of the things I think we've been talking about to some extent are kind of slightly lagging indicators. You know, I think firms can think, look, we're getting 10, 20, 50% year-on-year growth in some cases, you know, and actually if you're not addressing these, particularly the client experience, the people experience issues as you're doing that, there's a risk that, okay, short term you might be okay, but it's either going to lead to burnout or in turn to kind of poor service, and then you know that has a, you know, that can quickly then spiral the other way, I think, in terms of, you know, losing clients, putting a halt on that growth, and that's not a place that, you know, anybody wants to be in.
I entirely agree. So I think, you know, the argument is, look, the market's been with you for the last 2 or 3 years. You don't have to do much to carry on winning clients. Now I think clients are saying, well, I'm getting such inconsistent service, any attempt to cross-sell or upsell is incredibly hard, because it's almost like working with different firms. So I think addressing that client experience will be, as the economy slows, will be the key to growth. And also hanging on to your good employees, so that there are commercial implications.
Definitely. Ellie, you were going to come in as well, I think.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think a lot of this that we're hearing now is sort of in the phase of it's not a big problem, but we're seeing these elements, occurring, but, we wouldn't stop working with them because of it. But I think what's worrying is, down the road, it looks like this could sort of hinder we're seeing the next sort of steps of processes, that really partnership aspect. And I think that's when it will become, like you said, the cross-selling and upselling point. I think that's when it will become an issue.
Yeah. And I think, there is a risk that, I think if some of these integrations, particularly when you're talking about acquisitions, aren't kind of managed early on, it can definitely be something that is kind of left to kind of fester, and very often they don't necessarily work themselves out in the right way. We're coming towards the end, and just a reminder that if anyone does have questions, we're very happy to pick those up in the last few minutes. But I wonder if we can just reflect on, for the people on the kind of webinar today, any thoughts, Ben, Ellie, on some kind of key actions if they're thinking, look, we might be experiencing some of these growing pains. What would you say are some of the things that they can kind of actively do to kind of influence these within their firm?
I mean, we sort of covered already, but I think one of the sort of key strategies is, as we said, client research, but also really focusing on that internal reflection. I think really promoting sort of trusting the leadership by sort of being very open to feedback. I think there's a really important point around knowledge sharing, which I sort of touched on before. I think training and just making sure that, colleagues are connected, but they're also connected to the brand, to the organization. They know who they're working for and what the values are. And I think also marketing, I've heard a few times, saying about how they would really like some more marketing pieces to know exactly what the company, especially when we're talking about acquisitions and M&A, ensuring that the marketing is really aligning between the brands, to just so that integration is really seamless.
Yeah. And I think also, making a conscious effort to, particularly on the people, the culture piece, Ben, you were talking earlier before about, the hybrid working. We know that comes with lots of benefits, but, for professional services, I think that whole kind of culture and communication challenge is one that's still, at the heart of a lot of this. And I think making those conscious efforts to say, look, we need to, as leaders, be communicating the importance of these issues, and doing that regularly. It's not a kind of, annual town hall. These are things that kind of persist and need to be kind of addressed ongoing. And I think, marketing and BD can be a really positive conduit, both internally within the firm, but also, externally on a lot of that messaging. And it's two-way, as you say, Ellie. I think, listening to the market, listening to clients, but then also, being smart in playing a lot of that back. Any other thoughts, Ben?
No, I agree with, I think, both of you. I think it comes down, I think it's number one is things which used to happen organically now need to be designed. The customer experience, the employee experience, I think is number one. I think number two is it's the real danger. You get so subsumed with doing the client work. You need to take a pause and actually implement the new technologies, the processes. And look, we've gone through quite, very fast growth here at Meridian West. We've been facing this ourselves. It's not like it's an academic exercise. Some of the things we've been doing is like, defining our competency frameworks, creating a new structure for the business, really defining our kind of working protocols, how we deliver projects so as efficient as we can, trying to use technology and AI to automate as we can. And I think these things, they will pay off, but it does take time. So it's kind of making space that it's not sort of side of the desk project, I suppose.
And I think that's
how I feel about it anyway.
Yeah, and I think that's a really important point, actually, because it's something we've heard from a lot of our clients as well, is that even as they've grown, they still feel like they're quite dependent on some quite senior individuals, either in terms of the client relationships, stewarding those, the delivery of work. And yes, they may have recruited, they may have increased their number of kind of analysts, associates, but actually needing to be perhaps a bit more effective about delegation of work, bringing those up to speed, addressing the points around kind of client experience that we've talked about with them as they're kind of onboarded onto the organization, to kind of free up some of those senior individuals to, you know, to focus more perhaps on the kind of business management side of all of this.
Agreed.
So that brings us almost to the end. Thanks, Ben. Thanks, Ellie, for your contributions today. Just a quick reminder that our final webinar of the year will be on the 12th of December, and we'll be using that to look ahead to what we think will be some of the big trends for 2024. So join us for that if you can. There'll be a link if you haven't signed up already, that'll come through with a email shortly after today's webinar. This webinar is also available as a recording on YouTube, and that's the best place to sign up and subscribe if you don't want to miss any of our future webinars. So thanks everyone for attending today, and thanks Ben, and thanks Ellie.